Good evening. Tonight, the world is responding to a disaster in an island nation as we are still learning just how bad the situation is in the Philippines, though it's now clear it's worse than we first knew. The satellite imagery shows what's now categorized as Super Typhoon Haiyan at its peak intensity as it slammed into and then moved across the Philippine island, sending waves of seawater on land. And it's now official, this typhoon was the most powerful ever to make landfall. Now to the numbers, and these are sure to change because some places are still cut off. The number of those feared dead begins at 10,000. The UN estimates 600,000 people have been displaced by this disaster. The cost of all this damage could be as high as $14 billion. The storm surge completely washed away some villages and towns, and it left a thriving city, Tacloban, in utter ruins. That's where we begin tonight with NBC's Harry Smith, who witnessed the destruction on the ground.
It is an achingly familiar sight. The aftermath of this typhoon looks a lot like the remnants of other super disasters. And what we learned from the tsunami in Japan and the tsunami in the Indian Ocean and our own superstorm Sandy is that the unrelenting water knows no boundary.
Every building is either just significantly damaged or destroyed. You know, it's a 15 to 25-foot wave came across entire villages, and so everything's wiped out.
The city of Tacloban looks to be ground zero.
I survived because I climbed the tree.
We met Mikan Santos not far from the ruins of the airport.
I'm very happy because I'm alive. I'm alive.
Mikan and her family are huddled in a makeshift shelter because there is nothing left of their homes.
We don't have anything to do but to live. We survived the typhoon, and now we're questioning ourselves how to survive in terms of food, in terms of water.
A nearby chapel serves as a makeshift morgue.
The water.
Yeah. A father tells me his 2-year-old son is inside. He explains how fast the water rose. He wonders how anyone survived. People in this once bustling city of 200,000 have seen many typhoons before, but nothing like this. They are without food, without drinkable water. They have no adequate shelter. Our colleague Angus Walker is in another part of the decimated city.
The local marketplace, one of the worst affected areas in Tacloban. All these shops and houses made of wood, now a pile of tangled timber. Raya Almasira, 8 months pregnant, shows me the house, one of the few made of concrete, that her father had sheltered in.
We're not able to save our father. It's very sad.
This typhoon was different because it moved so rapidly, and because it was moving so fast and the winds were so ferocious, it piled up water in front of it. What you need to remember about the Philippines is it's not one landmass, it's more than 7,000 islands. In a place like this, the water just stacked up as it moved into the bays and channels, and once the water rose, it knocked down everything in sight.
There is no power, no fuel. Roads and bridges are out. Many coastal areas have not yet been searched, and because communications are out, there is frankly no way to know the status of the more isolated communities. We hitched a ride with the U.S. Marines on a C-130 into Tacloban. The U.S. military is ferrying in Philippine troops by the hundreds, and often carrying storm victims out. And while aid is beginning to arrive, it is but a trickle in an ocean of need.
There's no other way to describe the situation in Tacloban other than god-awful. The stench of death hangs everywhere you go. And quite frankly, it's a wonder the people who have survived have kept their sanity. Brian?
Harry Smith back in Manila tonight. Harry, thanks. Also among the members of our team on the ground covering this story in the Philippines, our chief medical editor, Dr. Nancy Snyderman. She made her way by air to one of the hospitals in Tacloban. On her way there, she witnessed some of the worst devastation, which is all the more alarming in the before and after photographs of the region. Once on the ground, she saw some of the patients who are right now enduring some desperate hours. Tonight, Nancy is on one of the neighboring islands of Cebu. Nancy, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. With roads blocked, ferries not running, and airports closed, we jumped on a chopper and headed to Tacloban to check out the possibility of a developing healthcare crisis. From the air, we see stunning devastation.
When you pass over the mountains, it looks like a major deforestation project. Trees are just stripped, and then you get into the
Villages along the coast wiped out by the massive tidal surge that left the city of Tacloban in ruins. We made our way to Divine Word Hospital, heavily damaged, officially closed for business, but people still come. Dr. Francis Visto stayed through the storm, scrambling to save lives and medical supplies.
We tried to salvage what was left of the pharmacy in the emergency room.
The lobby has been converted into a treatment area. With just bandages and antiseptic left, doctors and nurses can't handle more than simple cuts and abrasions.
Contractions over now.
This woman just arrived in labor.
Deep breaths.
The staff is living on little sleep. You have no generator, no lights.
Yes, ma'am.
There is no power for lights or refrigeration and no security. Across the city, the scarcity of food, fresh water, and sanitation is setting the stage for a public health nightmare.
Are you worried about cases of dysentery?
Oh, definitely, ma'am, because we have no potable water source here.
The staff is haunted by those they couldn't help.
Did patients die because you couldn't treat them?
Well, somehow, because we were out of resources. We just made the most of what we had. Even as doctors, we stayed, we didn't even go to our families immediately. We stayed with the patients.
Even post-operative patients were sent home because of lack of medicine, and patients who died were moved into a makeshift morgue.
This is where we kept the bodies. Oh, they were actually inpatients. So when the power was out, the O2s were out, the water was out, and no more medications because our pharmacy was destroyed.
It has to be tough to know you can't save everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
And when patients come in now and they're hungry and they've had no water and they're hurting, what do you say to them?
We just say we're sorry.
This is the beginning of a tropical depression that's moving into the same place that got ravaged just 5 days ago. The concern is this could further damage the water supply and put already vulnerable people at risk for dysentery, diarrhea, and other infectious diseases. Brian?
Nancy Snyderman back on the island of Cebu tonight after her trip to Tacloban, where this is developing into a very, very sad story indeed. The Philippines is extremely vulnerable to storms like this. The island sits smack in the midst of the warm tropical waters of the Pacific that feed these storms along the track. This is the fourth typhoon to hit this year in the same region devastated by an earthquake just last month. Tonight, NBC's Tom Costello takes a look inside this storm, including how it compares to some of the strongest storms we've seen here in the U.S.
There were no Hurricane Hunter aircraft inside Typhoon Haiyan, but meteorologists believe it was among the biggest ever recorded. 370 miles across, with winds peaking well over 200 miles per hour and a 20-foot storm surge. In hurricane rankings, a Category 5.
Typhoon is the word they use for hurricanes in the Western Pacific. There's no difference in the system. Typhoons tend to get bigger and stronger because there's more warm water to maneuver in before they run into land.
The super typhoon so devastating because it reached peak wind strength right before hitting land. By comparison, Hurricanes Katrina and Wilma in 2005 had peak winds of 175 miles per hour. These are 40-mile-per-hour winds now. At the University of Maryland's wind tunnel, researchers strapped me in to experience storm force winds. 74-mile-per-hour winds now. This would be a Category 1 storm. From 74 to 96. Standing up to these winds is virtually impossible. Then to 115 miles per hour, a fraction of the 195 winds in the Philippines. And I would say it's an incredibly painful experience to get pulled and buffeted by these winds. As we saw at the insurance industry's testing center, homes built to code in the U.S. start coming apart at 100 miles per hour. In Florida, where building codes are strongest, most can withstand winds up to 140. While scientists can't say whether climate change contributed to this particular typhoon, they believe global warming is making storms stronger.
And we expect that as we go into the future, the number of hurricanes doesn't necessarily increase, but the Category 4 and 5 will increase.
And experts caution nothing can stand up to a Category 5. Tom Costello, NBC News, College Park, Maryland.
The U.S. government is contributing an initial $20 million to the worldwide relief effort. That number will grow. This initial money will provide emergency shelter and food and water and sanitation. Tonight, preparations are underway for starters to send the USS George Washington aircraft carrier battle group from Hong Kong to the Philippines to help with relief efforts as well. Meanwhile, a lot of Americans are waiting to hear about loved ones, and they're stepping up to help. We get more on that from NBC's Mike Taibbi in Southern California.
Laura Henderson of Pasadena has been glued to the TV and the internet since last Thursday.
He's saying that all of his families are gone.
She finally heard from her own father that he and her brother and mom had made it, but hasn't heard directly from an aunt who suffers from diabetes. You don't know that she can survive it with a medical condition?
No, we don't.
Medications and food and water and more are on the way. Big nonprofits like Direct Relief in Santa Barbara with warehouses filled with donations to be shipped out ASAP.
It won't do anyone any good unless it gets into the proper hands, to the proper place with the proper controls.
Elsewhere, the Team Rubicon squad has deployed, veterans specializing in relief work.
Going to try and help at least rebuild the community, and hopefully we leave it a little bit stronger.
And of course, relief efforts are ramping up within the huge Filipino-American population. Check out donation drives at popular supermarkets.
I saw the news, and it's very horrible.
And in the digital age, Filipino-Americans like Rachel Estuar are using social media to spread the word about relief efforts.
Facebook has been my source of getting that information so that I can ask my network of friends to help.
There are still many vigils like this one. Filipino emigres wondering, did my loved one survive? And if they did survive but are injured or are ill, are they getting the help they need? 4 days after the typhoon's maximum impact, the relief effort is straining to match historic needs. Hour by hour, even minute by minute, more help on the way. Mike Taibbi, NBC News, Pasadena.
And for our viewers who wish to know how to help, we have put that information, all kinds of it, on our website tonight, NBC Nightly News.